there's a lot of speculation on Jeb. I can tell you that I can speak for 41 when I say this. He ought to run for president and would be a great president should he win.
If there is one thing we can take from the post-midterm ballyhoo, those calling John Boehner and others traitors to the Republican Party, Nancy Pelosi wandering about trying to figure out where all her Democratic support went, and now, of course, people thinking they might run for president, it's that we are now living in a time of major discourse among so-called political allies, and America needs to be very worried about where this is going to take us. All right, he's a former spokesman for President George W. Bush, meaning he knows all too well what happens around the seat of power, senior project manager at Hathaway Strategies, and author of the book, The War on Millennials, airing grievances and offering solutions through the eyes of America's next generation of leaders. Pete Seat joins the MidPoint House. Pete, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Ed. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Is there any reason to think whatsoever that those millennials that you talk about, who were mere babies by the time George Bush and George Bush Sr. were in office, would even for a moment consider voting for Jeb Bush?
Well, absolutely. As you indicated, not many millennials have a familiarity with the Bush family. I know that's kind of silly sounding, considering that there have been two Bush presidents. But consider this, in 2004, the first year I was eligible to vote, George W. Bush was just being reelected. And the youngest millennials who will be able to vote in 2016 were just 6 years old. They were only 10 years old when George W. Bush left office. So they were clearly not politically conscientious at that moment in their lives. And whatever diminishing resentment there is for our 43rd president isn't felt among a lot of millennials. And so there is an opening for Jeb Bush.
All right. Now, with regard to Jeb Bush, we hear, first thing out of people's mouths were Bush fatigue. Why do we hear about Bush fatigue and we don't hear people talk about Clinton fatigue?
Well, because there's nothing to talk about right now with Hillary Clinton. She's not made the moves that Jeb Bush is making, at least not outwardly quite yet.
But you would think certainly because we've heard so much about Hillary, you hear so much about the administration, that people would be tired of it because hasn't she been running for president now for about 6 years?
At least, if not more than that. And there is Clinton fatigue, and you're going to see it exacerbated, Ed, by the fact that Hillary Clinton's rationale for running for president is that she's Hillary Clinton. Jeb Bush, I believe, is going to come to the arena with ideas, armed with a record of results from the time he was governor of Florida. He's already said he's going to put out an ebook with his vision and plan for the future of this country. And all we're hearing from Hillary Clinton is that she's Hillary Clinton. So that fatigue is only going to get worse when it comes to her, unlike for him.
What about those who say that Jeb Bush, and I heard this again today from several commentators, is simply not conservative enough to win the presidency in 2016?
I think it's silly. There has been a lot of commentary on both sides, a lot that came out just yesterday saying, look to Jeb Bush's record as governor of Florida, where he cut taxes dramatically in a state that doesn't have an income tax. He found other ways to reduce the tax burden on the citizens of Florida. He used the line item veto. He was very well known for doing so, to cut millions upon millions of dollars of spending. And he championed vouchers and charter schools, the idea of school choice, something I think he would bring to a national campaign.
Well, remember that, too. Common Core is something that he's been embroiled in the past, and there's a lot of people saying that that in itself would be enough to take him out of the race, that enough people would be against Common Core that it would cost him a vote.
Look, what we need to know about presidents who get elected is they do it against all odds. And there will be obstacles for Jeb Bush, just as there will be obstacles for anyone who decides to run. But you get elected president by proving yourself in the battlefield, by showing that you've been tested, that you have a record of results. And I think Jeb Bush is well positioned to do that, as are other potential candidates who will join the Republican primary field here in the next several months.
30 seconds. Is he better seated then to go after the Hispanic vote, seeing as we've talked to a lot of Hispanics and Hispanic Americans who are not happy with people like Ted Cruz?
Well, Jeb Bush is the only one I know who speaks fluent Spanish, so he can easily give a stump speech to a Hispanic audience and easily appeal to them in their native language.
All right, stand by because another go round with Pete's seat. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to turn to the furor over what's happening between the Republicans and the Democrats. Because quite frankly, ever since the midterm elections, all we hear is that both sides are fighting with each other. Nancy Pelosi's not happy. John Boehner's not happy. Nobody's happy. And here we come to 2015 and the new Congress. That and so much more when we continue right here on MidPoint, where every day we question everything. So welcome back to MidPoint. Former spokesman for President George W. Bush, political analyst and author Pete Seat joins us once again. All right, Pete, during the break, we got the word coming over from Reuters that Jeb Bush absolutely has now got to be running for president. Why? Because the president today detailed his new plans for the Cuba situation, if you will. And Jeb Bush has come out saying that he opposes President Barack Obama's plan. Every good candidate will be right on top of that, and they will immediately say something, won't they?
Absolutely. And speaking of Cuba, I should add, it came to my attention that Marco Rubio also speaks fluent Spanish, of course, the son of Cuban immigrants. So if he runs, he can do it as well.
Yeah, but doesn't it seem to many people, though, that Marco Rubio, because he's gone back and forth on so many things, and every time it comes up as a real, honest possibility of somebody running for the Republican nomination, we don't hear Marco Rubio anymore. It would seem to some people that he's sort of blown his chance.
I don't know if that's true. I mean, there's public displays of interest in a candidacy. There's also private displays. And I think he's been under the radar, talking to donors, talking to potential supporters. A word on the street is he's got a big meeting of potential donors coming up in a week or two in Florida. And there is a strong appeal to Marco Rubio and what he can bring, not just as potential presidential candidate, but as a member of the ticket as well, depending on how this all shakes out.
We talk about fighting going on in Congress. I can only imagine what will happen now because this speaks to what happened today. The president announcing a resumption of diplomatic relations with Cuba. You've got Jeb Bush against it, Marco Rubio against it. Many people that we're hearing from already say we're against it, and Congress will simply not lift that embargo. But I wanted to ask, first of all, get your opinion on what the president did today. Some people say he's getting rid of a 50-year-old plan that hasn't worked. Others say all he's doing it is to curry favor with Hispanic voters again.
Yeah, it's not going to do him much good. He's not running for election again, but I think.
But the Democratic Party, certainly, they rely on the Hispanic voters now.
They do. They rely on a lot of different constituencies. They have become a party, a national party that's trying to cobble together these different coalitions in order to win. Whereas I hope Republicans are going to take the view of trying to deliver a broad, appealing message to the entire country. But my only reaction to today's news is that Cuban cigar aficionados are probably the biggest winners in this, since they're able to bring back, I think, $100 worth on any trips to Cuba.
You better believe it was awful tough to keep people in the control room right now from going and getting the ticket right after this was announced. 90 seconds we got left, Pete. What are we supposed to make of all the infighting in the Democratic and the Republican parties right now? People calling John Boehner a traitor at this point. Nancy Pelosi wondering where all her support went. Who's actually in worse shape between the two?
That's a very good question. You know, elections, and especially winning, have an amazing way of bringing people together, whereas the United States Senate has a really amazing way of tearing them apart. And we kind of saw that last week in what happened on the Senate floor when Ted Cruz and Mike Lee went to the floor Friday evening with no notice and really disrupted the weekend for the entire U.S. Senate. I think a lot of people are misreading these last election results. Certainly good for the Republican Party, but they have been given an opportunity now to legislate and to govern and to prove that they can do both. Democrats have proven that they can't. So Republicans now have a chance, and they cannot allow the infighting to continue. We have to prove it to the American people. Republicans have to prove it that they are serious about getting this country back on the right track.
Infighting continues, and it would be worse for the Republicans than the Democrats, correct?
I think so. The Democrats have a very thin bench when it comes to national electoral politics, but they can take advantage of this if Republicans don't play it correctly.
All right. Want to make sure once again to note that Everything has happened today. Everything continues along. Yet we're in the holiday season. We have to have a really nice feel about it. So, Pete, before we leave, very Merry Christmas. We all get to relax now for a little while, wait for 2015, and watch everything blow up again in Congress.
That's right. We get a 2-week respite, right?
There you go. Remind everybody the book, The War on Millennials by Pete Seat. We've talked about that. We will continue to as well next time we visit. Pete, thanks so much for joining us. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Ed. Have a good one.
You too. Let's head around the dial after the break. We'll talk about Pakistan, the president, and Cuba, Jeb Bush, and so much more when we continue right here on MidPoint, where we question everything.